Now, the birth of Jesus the Messiah took place in this way. Joseph is a teenager without enough money for a hotel room. He is engaged to Mary, barely old enough to bear a child. They don't know each other very well, but as was the custom of the day, their parents, peasants, have arranged things for them, exchanged the dowry, picked the spouse, found a caterer. The date is set. And then Mary breaks the news to Joseph, "I'm pregnant." Joseph immediately assumes his spouse is unfaithful. The good news continues, "I'm pregnant by the Holy Spirit." Unfaithful and blasphemous and poor and young. In my Bible, the Gospel of Matthew is 51 pages long. The narrative just rushes, which means the author isn't inclined or doesn't have space to dwell on the details. Joseph has a dream. Jesus is born. The wise men arrive. The story continues. Joseph recedes, and we never really hear from him again. But let's be real. If this story is true, no dream, no matter how good, could ever erase Joseph's apprehensions or his problems. Consider this. When the time comes for a married pregnant woman to give birth, her spouse has a few key responsibilities. Drive to Prentice without getting in a car accident. Make sure the insurance card is handy. What else? Breathe. There's not really much to do. The pregnant partner does the work. Our role is limited, which means we shouldn't mess it up. Joseph messed it up. He couldn't even find a room for his wife to give birth in. Imagine trying to live that down. Imagine Joseph as the first Christmas draws near. No money, no safe place for his wife to give birth in, no plausible explanation for her pregnancy. I don't know what a perfect first century family might have looked like, but I am quite confident that his did not fit the Holderness ideal. How scared they must have been. How strange they must have felt. Confused, needy, imperfect. Their unusual family turned absolutely upside down before it even had a chance to begin. I know a thing or two about unusual families. I come from one. There is a picture in one of my mother's photo albums of the day she and my stepfather were married. They're in the center of it, holding hands, and they look pleased, but also totally overwhelmed. Both of them had lost a spouse to cancer 18 months previously. Their kids are on either side of them, 6 teenagers, mouths stuffed full of braces, regrettable 80s hair. When I look at that picture, that's right, I once had regrettable 80s hair. When I look at that picture, and I see my biological sibling, my adopted sibling, my 3 step siblings whom I didn't know that well, and my totally awkward 14-year-old self, I do not see the ideal. Far from it. I remember feeling strange, scared, confused, far from perfect. I wasn't alone. In America, unusual families are everywhere. In increasing numbers, African Americans marry whites, atheists marry Christians, men marry men, women marry women, Democrats marry Republicans, long-standing couples choose not to have children, good single friends join forces as a part of the voluntary kin movement, blended families, same-sex families, adoptive families, single-parent families, every sort of family. Now, I got that list from a New York Times article, but I could have read it straight from the St. Paul's Directory. Many of our families don't fit the ideal. Many of us have probably felt strange, far from perfect. I did see one ideal family this week on the internet. I've mentioned them already, the Holderness family. Have any of you seen them? Did any of you see this viral Christmas card? Oh, good, you did, Marcia. I'm not the only person who wasted time on the internet this week. Well, this video Christmas card, I'll try and explain it to you. It's received more than 2.5 million visits on the internet since it first was published. It's a Christmas card, a video this family have made. And in it, they sing and dance in matching pajamas while boasting of the year's accomplishments. Their kids seem perfect. They bought a new car. They ran triathlons. They live in a giant house. She appeared in the movie Iron Man 3, and he quit his job as a news anchor to start a video company. So not only is this a Christmas card that seems like an advertisement for their perfect family, it's also an advertisement for how perfectly they can make a Christmas card. And as is the case with a lot of advertising, it leaves the viewer, or at least this viewer, feeling insecure by the time it ends. Suddenly, my family's 99 Honda and 100 other problems seem a bit more vivid. Maybe a professionally filmed family video would help. That option probably didn't cross Joseph's mind. He couldn't afford it, or anything else for that matter. He couldn't rely on his family's perfection or their upper middle class connections. He and Mary were nobody. They had nothing to rely upon, no one to lean on, except for God. Their family had nothing to rely on, no one to lean upon, except for God. You have heard me quote Kierkegaard before. Man arrives at the highest pitch of his perfection when he becomes suited to God through becoming absolutely nothing in himself. Man becomes the highest pitch of his perfection when he becomes suited to God through becoming absolutely nothing in himself. You were born to be in relationship with God. That is when you are at your best, when God's presence saturates your life, heals your wound, calms you down, stirs you up, makes you leap, lets you see. That is when you are at your best, when your life is saturated with the presence of God. But so long as I am convinced that I'm strong, nearly perfect, able to make my own way, I will hold God off at a distance. I don't need her. She's just a notion floating in the ether, a custom arrested in the past, a tradition we pull out of the basement once a year, a mystery confined to heaven, not something I actually need right next to me in my life. What perfect person needs God? What perfect family needs God? If this is the way I approach my life, I will never become the person I was born to be. My perfection will not allow God to come into my life. This is what I find so nettlesome about the way our culture encourages us to pretend that we are perfect, as if who you are is actually your resume. I just teed off on the Holderness family, but that video is just a handy example, a symptom, a particularly vivid one, but a symptom of an illness that most of us suffer. We are encouraged to present a smooth, invulnerable facade in order to impress. And that might happen. We may well impress someone with our assumed perfection. But the facade also functions as a suit of armor. And that suit of armor keeps God out. We ought to take it off. Take the armor off. This is one of the best gifts that church gives us. Here in this place, it is safe to take the armor off. More than that, it is essential. This is it. Right now on the fourth Sunday of Advent. I'm so glad you braved this ice storm to get here, because this is the closest to absolute truth my preaching will ever get. This amazing paradox in accepting the fact that we cannot get it right, that we are far from perfect, that we are confused and needy. There and then, we discover God's presence, God's care. Christmas, no matter what day of the year it is that we make that realization, Emmanuel, God with us. Do you think it is a coincidence that Christ was born into a shaky, uncertain, broken family? Of course not. God goes where he is needed. Where else would he go? Joseph and Mary find themselves trembling on December 24th, not thumping their chests about triathlon times and new business ventures. Joseph and Mary are confused, they are baffled, they are needy. And then, in that confusion and from that need, they find the presence of God right there in their midst, in their laps, right in the middle of their imperfection. As if it called out to him, "Come, we need you. Be born into our midst." Is your family unusual? Take heart, so was Christ's. Is your family imperfect? You can ask yourself that question when you all gather around the table on the 25th. Is my family imperfect? Take heart. So was Christ's. We tend to focus on the incarnation as something unique to the individual named Jesus. But none of us are truly individual. We all have belly buttons. We all come from somewhere, from some family. As Stanley Hauerwas notes, someone had to change our diapers. That is our first hint of what grace must be like. It's interesting to consider that someone had to change Jesus' diapers. I guess that's the first time, my bet is that's the first time this has ever been said from the pulpit, but let's go there for a moment. You should see Pastor Sarah. Yes, she's getting ready. Someone had to change Jesus' diapers. And it's interesting to think that this was his first hint of what grace must be like. Which is to say that when the love of God took up residence in Mary and Joseph's family, it was not limited to one individual member of that family. It flowed in the relationships through the whole family. It pervaded their entire family system. It took shape there. It grew up there. What happened in the home where Christ was raised? God took up residence, not in a perfect family, but in an unusual one. What happens at Christmas? God comes to us. Yes, God is not entirely collapsed onto or into this earth. God remains in heaven, remains exalted. But in this humble family, God also becomes humble. Here's what happens at Christmas. God learns to be merciful because God lives in an imperfect family. Isn't that what you learn how to do in family? Forgive? You better. For while families introduce us to love, they also wound us. All of us. Nobody gets out of their family unscathed. Which is to say that if it weren't for forgiveness, families would not be able to exist. That's where Jesus learned how to forgive. Here's what happens at Christmas. The power behind all that is and was and ever shall be learns how to serve. Not in the abstract, but in his family. For you know that Mary taught Jesus how to clear the table years before he taught his followers how good it feels to wait on others. Here's what happens at Christmas. The one who is our judge gets judged. For that happens in families too. Imagine Joseph teaching Jesus how to plumb a line or turn a screw, and then looking over his shoulder to evaluate his work like all fathers do. Here is what happens at Christmas. God remains eternal majesty, but also becomes a brother, a family member, here in time. Here in time, with all of us who have ever lived in an imperfect family, with every family whose imperfections call out to him. Your family arguments and financial struggles and long-running problems are all actually prayers of invocation. Come be with us. We need you. Your anxieties about your children and your concern about your parents are actually a song singing, O come, Emmanuel. Be born into our imperfect families. For what other kind of family is there but an imperfect one? George Burns once joked, happiness is having a large, loving, close-knit family in another city. Nothing diminishes a joke like explaining it, but that joke is funny because the perfect family isn't. If what I've said today is true, all of our families need God's presence in their midst. And it may well be the lucky families whose imperfections won't let them deny that fact. It is certainly the wise ones who embrace it, who name it. O come, Emmanuel, into all of our holy families. Amen.